field of American religious history like now as compared to when you first entered it in, or first started to chart out your career in the 1970s?
I think probably the major difference is that American religious history is now a field. When I started, people did themes and topics in American religion, but sometimes from the angle of church history, from the seminaries, sometimes from the universities, or from the angle of history where religion was important. So in the 1970s, Henry May from the history side, Sidney Alstrom from the seminary become history side, were very important people and did major works. Today, I think religion is taken to mean more the practice of individuals. There's obviously been a very strong influence of social history and now more recently cultural history on religious studies. I think there's been great gain in having a separate American religious history field, particularly with the advances in studying the lives of ordinary practitioners. I also probably think there's been some loss. I continue to think that questions of belief, doctrine, formal church order, formal church leadership are important, not to the exclusion of what has become more prominently studied, but alongside it. So I guess I'm old enough to think that much that I learned in the early days of my career is still valuable, but I also think that much that's been done recently is very valuable as well.
Harvey Cox, in his new book, The Future of Faith, which the Boston Globe praised as the culmination of his life scholarship,
he says that in the last 50 years or so, there's been this kind of age of the Spirit, and people are less interested now in doctrine and in dogma. But do you think that maybe we, as religious historians, want to read that back into the past and suppose that maybe other people weren't interested in this, say, in the 19th century? Or
yes, certainly ordinary believers of different sorts had an intense interest in doctrine. All you have to do is study the great Methodist, Baptist Donnybrooks of the antebellum period, or later on some of the internal church struggles that tore apart the northern mainline churches in the 1920s and 30s. These were disputes in which clergy played a major role, but which were intensely followed and participated in by the laity. I think Harvey Cox is probably correct that there has been a new emphasis upon religious feeling, religious life, religious practice, as opposed to doctrine. I don't myself think that means necessarily that doctrinal matters have become less important. And it's interesting to have Harvey Cox thinking about things in the U.S. because he's also been interested in the spread of various forms of Christianity around the world, as well as other religions around the world. And my sense of the Christian faith outside of the United States, outside of Western Europe, is that practice and doctrine are pretty closely intertwined. The tremendous surge of interest in Christianity in China, for example, seems to be a two-pronged interest. One, pragmatic, practical ways of life in now a free market society. But two, the Christian doctrine as a possible replacement for communist and Confucian ways of looking at the world that were not doctrinal in a Western sense, but certainly were intellectual in a broad sense. So, I would think that the emphasis upon religion as practice, religion as feeling, religion as dispositions adds something very significant to what religious historians study. But it's not clear to me that those new emphases have excluded or pushed away what had been more traditional in the study of religious history.
This is sort of a good segue then to this other question about works that you have read recently, books in American religious history that you think are going in positive directions or sort of charting out new territory that you find interesting. I wonder if you have some of those.
Well, I very much enjoy always new books by established scholars, but so for example, Brooks Hollifield's two recent books, the great study of theology in America, and then a very interesting book on the history of the clergy in America seem to me old-fashioned in some ways with respect to subject matter, but handled with a kind of subtlety and nuance and narrative force that makes them truly remarkable. Thinking more about younger people, however, who made very fine contribution. I'm high on Rachel Wheeler's book on the comparative study of missionary work with Native Americans in the 18th century between the Moravians and the Congregationalists. That to me is an almost ideal book in drawing on new sources for the shape of Native American religious practice, but then also understanding that for many of the Native Americans who accepted or rejected the Christian faith, there were strongly dogmatic and doctrinal reasons. I would say the same thing, I think, about Charles Irons' book on the black and white relationships in antebellum Virginia. Irons used innovative sources to get at the interaction between blacks and whites in what I would consider a full practical and theoretical, theological account of the people he was working with. I like very much Heather Curtis's book on healing at the end of the 19th century because it is sophisticated in its research and in her perspective. So she handles a topic that's easy to be dogmatic about, but she's nicely flexible in trying to foreground the attitudes and practices of the people she's working at, while having, of course, some of her own things to say about what was happening in this surge of healing. In a comparable book in Canada's James Opp's study of healing in Canada at about the same time, which is also very good. So I guess my tendency is probably to pick out books that treat matters or look at subjects that I'm interested in and do them in ways that reinforce my reasons for being interested, but then also show some new angles and perspectives on what's being studied.